I'm going to walk through some key points for your takeaway. All right, your takeaway sets the stage for the entire swing. All right, so I'm just going to show you a really good solid takeaway, and you want to get as close as possible to that. Obviously work with a golf professional to find out which takeaway is best for you, but this is one that you see the pros do, and it creates a nice solid backswing. All right, so as you take the club back, you're going to immediately move your pressure to your trail side right out of the gate. Put a lot of force into the ground. All right, the club head's going to stay low, and then from here you're going to allow the club to vertically hinge. All right, so as you get to the halfway mark, so if my head is noon, as you get to 9 o'clock in the backswing, all right, the club should naturally hinge up. All right, you can see I'm keeping the chest to arm connection, so my upper arm is connected to my torso, so the only thing flapping in the light breeze are my forearms. You're going to maintain that connection right out of the gate. All right, so you can see that the hands are in line with the chest. Now from here, the club should naturally vertically hinge, and then you'll complete your rotation. All right. Now I want you to be mindful of your hip rotation. All right, as you take the club back, you don't want to excessively rotate the hips. All right, let the chest be the driver of the takeaway and let the hips react. They'll move a little bit, but don't over rotate them, because then your hands will get too deep. And I'll show you that from down the line. So right out of the gate, really focus on the chest, keeping the club head low, start adding some vertical hinge, and then here, as you complete your backswing, you'll complete your hip rotation. All right, that will be an ideal situation. All right, so my shoulder line is rotated more. You can see my trail shoulder, my back shoulder here are rotated. My lead shoulder is in the back foot quadrant. All right, I have a nice angle with my leg. This is a really good backswing. My hands are high. All right, that will be a good backswing. All right, now depending on your mobility and your neck mobility, your eye line is going to move off the ball. All right, so I like an eye line that's just behind the club head. All right, and then I keep it there as I get to the top. All right, so my eye line's behind the club head. I'm moving my pressure, keeping the club head low. Now I'm going to add some nice vertical hinge, complete my hip rotation and shoulder rotation, elevate my arms a little bit, and I'm done. My eye line is still here. Shoulder line is in the back foot quadrant, and I'm poised to start my awesome downswing. All right, my leg is angled, so I have something to push. All right, this is a really good backswing right here. All right, so now that's on the balls of my feet. I'm in my awesome setup. Now, as soon as I take the club back, I'm going to put pressure into that trail side. Bang, the club head is going to be outside the shaft. All right, from here, as I keep rotating, the club's going to vertically hinge, and I'm going to finish my hip rotation and elevate my arms a little bit. All right, I'm in my posture. All right, so that would be a really good top of the swing, backswing in general. All right, so some variations at the top of the swing, and this is not necessarily good or bad. All right, it really depends on how you move throughout the swing and how that affects the club face and the shot position. All right, everyone's going to be different. I'm just going to show you the extremes. Here at the top, the lead hand is super cupped, so that opens the club face. The toe of the club is pointing straight down. All right, this would be shut, excessive bow, and now the club face is dead shut. Again, Dustin does this really well, so like I said, we just want to avoid the extremes. You don't want to be an outlier unless you can really manage that. So you got to work with a golf professional to find out what works best for you. And since I'm up here, I'm just going to let you know where players go off with their grip. And I see this a ton. All right, they get to the top and they separate with their hands like this at the top of the grip. All right, so there's a lot of gap here. All right, you do not have good control of this grip. All right, so you really want everything together. All right, more of a neutral wrist at the top Again, avoid the extremes. This opens the face, this shuts the face, more neutral. And then make sure that everything's connected. So whether you interlocked, overlap, or 10 finger. All three of those grips are great, but they need to be connected. This would be bad. All right, so just some key checkpoints here at the top of your swing. I'll show you in a moment where players go off. Right now I'm showing you correct. All right, so my club face is square, my grip is connected. All right, my hands are one, my trail arm is behaving, my lead arm is in line with my shoulder line, my butt is deep, my shoulder line is down. So I'm staying in my hip flexion and forward bend. My eye line is down behind the club head where it was. Where players go off, few ways. All right, they disconnect the lead arm to the chest doesn't move, and they take their hands out, so away from their body and around. So the club head gets inside the hand line too soon. There's a gap here, and then from here, they most likely come over the top. So the club head gets inside and the hands get too deep. All right, there's no vertical hinge here. All right, the top of the swing might look like this where the lead arm is below the shoulder line. They're way laid off. All right, because of that, they're most likely going to get steep. So the shaft is going to pitch forward and get steep. All right, so this is steep where the shaft is vertical. This is shallow, where the club is more laying down and the club head is behind the hands. All right, that allows us the rotational freedom to swing through. If we get steep, we have to stand up to try to square the face or back out of it. So if we're too steep, we're going to hang back to try to shallow the club. Way too much work. All right, so that's why the takeaway is so important. All right, the other thing I see is, again, the chest isn't moving and the arms lift. All right, so it's just call it an early lifter. All right, trying to get the hands up high, not really connected with the upper arm to the chest out of the gate. All right, the lead arm is way above the shoulder line. All right, and from there, you're most likely going to stay here and be steep. All right, so those are the two extremes, way too inside and way too elevated. All right, so again, just be neutral. Turn the chest, keep your hands far from your head, add some vertical hinge and more rotation, add a little elevation with the arms, and you're done. All right, from the face-on view, where players go off with their takeaway, all right, you can see as I take the club back, the first scenario where the club whips inside too soon, where the hands work out and away, it would look like this. All right, so then on the downswing, the club head's going to pitch forward most likely. Or they're just going to kind of spin out their body to try to get the club head back into position. All right, so the takeaway, the club head and the hands work too deep because the chest isn't moving. All right, the second scenario is where players lift, the early lifter. All right, so the front shoulder never moves. They just lift the arms up like this, typically because they're trying to keep their eye line on the ball. All right, players are trying to keep their eye line on the ball, so they lift. All right, instead we want to get this shoulder in the back foot quadrant, eye line behind the club head, nice wide takeaway so the club head's low, hands are low at this point in the swing. We're not early lifting or taking the club head too inside. The chest and the arms are connected. All right, both of these scenarios, the chest and the arms aren't connected. We need that connection. That's why we get our arms on top. So then we can rotate it together. And then we're going to allow some vertical hinge. All right, that is key. When players go off is they'll have too much horizontal hinge. This elbow, trail elbow will work in like this. All right, so that's why we want to create some width here. Boom. So you're going to feel like both arms are straight. They're not rigid, they're soft, but they're more straight. Add some vertical hinge, and here at the top, you're done. If I took this hand off, I like slightly less than 90 degrees. This would be okay, but where players go off is they do this. top of their swing so they get real narrow like this. All right, they get this action. All right, so from down the line here, I'm going to show you this is important. When players go off with their arm structure at the top is they get narrow. All right, so this trail arm is super bent and their hands are close to their head. All right, so you got to feel like you're reaching. So if I took this hand off, you have less than 90 degrees. Hands far from your head, not narrow. And I'll share one other popular culprit that players do in their backswing is they try to add too much vertical hinge. So they're really trying to get this vertical hinge and they get too narrow. So the shaft, they've maxed out their lag in the backswing. So the only way to go on the downswing is this way because they've maxed out the lag. Because they're just trying so hard to create angles with the shaft. Instead, it's better to go wider and then load it versus trying to max it out and then even try to get more. It just doesn't work. It doesn't flow. So I like a nice wide one-piece takeaway, add a little bit of vertical hinge, complete your rotation, and then on the downswing, you'll create the lag by shallowing the club. All right, that's another topic for another day. All right, right now we're really focused on the takeaway, so just avoid over vertical hinging. All right, avoid the extreme. So avoid the excessive vertical or the excessive horizontal hinge where you don't have any vertical hinge. All right, this will get the club head too inside. This will create a narrow backswing. All right, good rule of thumb for completing your backswing. Go ahead and put the club on your chest. Now go ahead and get into your hip hinge. Now rotate. You want your eye line where the club is pointing, and you want your torso. You can see the back of me. All right, you can see my back. When players go off is they don't turn. All right, so the shoulder is over the front foot. We need the shoulder into the back foot. All right, so you really want to see this back, ideally that back shoulder. All right, this would be okay, but this is better. All right, so now the shaft is pointing way over here. My eye line is still here, but the shaft's over here. When players go off, as the shaft never gets past the ball. All right, we need to get it over here in the back foot quadrant. You can see what it does to the angle of my leg too. All right, so just be mindful of that. We want to wind up. All right, so I'm staying centered, but I'm focused on rotation. Players try to keep their eye line on the ball, and then they never really make a good turn because they're trying to keep their eye line on the ball. So get your eye line behind the club head, get the shoulder in the back foot quadrant. All right, and you can see the angle it creates. Where players go off is they'll get stacked up on this leg. So if the shoulder line stays too level, say they don't go down, they go over because they're trying to get behind the ball, they'll get stacked up on the leg. Eye line's way over here, the leg is straight, so now you have nothing to push on the downswing. When we create that angle, it's like a push. We're pushing off it. That's why we create that angle. All right, if we're stacked up, there's nothing to push, so you're most likely going to come over the top.